Just a week after House GOP leaders unveiled a framework for immigration reform, House Speaker John Boehner apparently tapped the brakes, all but ruling out passing any immigration legislation before the midterm elections this fall. But is the issue truly off the table, and why did the Speaker dial it back? Congressman Steve King, a Republican from Iowa, has been a vocal opponent of some of his party's moves on immigration reform and joins us live. Good to see you, Congressman. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me back. I appreciate it, Shannon.
Okay, so the Speaker this week talked about this, and he said that part of it is because the President is going around modifying laws and not sticking to laws. And how could we get the American people to trust us to pass immigration reform if we don't know that the President is going to enforce it as you all would pass it? Is that the only reason that you think that the Speaker backed off on pushing for reform at this point?
I think it's far from the only reason, but I think it's the one that can be articulated the best and the one that I think resonates across the full spectrum of the party. And we should be making a bigger deal about the President's executive overreach. That's starting to penetrate now. But in the end, the equations are this, that for about, more than a year, there has been some intense polling that's gone on, and let me say the immigrant community has been examined by the pollsters thoroughly. And we're starting to understand what this really means. They aren't coming in as the conservatives they were promised by, say, Karl Rove, for example. And the freshman and sophomore class are getting up to speed and learning about the implications of this. Senator Jeff Sessions has put out really good information on how this impacts the labor force, especially the low-skilled. And as the intellectual knowledge of the reality of this comes forward, I think it came together in the conference in Cambridge just a little over a week ago when 3 or 4 to 1 out of the members of the Republican conference stepped up and said, don't do this. And most of them said, don't do this while we have this president, because we've seen the president violate his own oath of office so many times. You can't do business with him. And then there's no data out there that supports that this is good for America or for Republicans.
So why was Republican leadership pressing it so hard then? Because polling that we've talked about on this show as well, Quinnipiac recently, when Quinnipiac asked people what top priorities they thought that Congress and the president should have, immigration was at the bottom of the list. And that sparks a lot about why then the GOP leadership, when they have so much ammunition with the failures of Obamacare to date, would pivot to something like immigration.
That is an interesting question, and I would just add to that point that you made in your question, Shannon, that the President gave a speech to America from Hawaii during his Christmas vacation when he chastised Congress for going home to visit our families over Christmas. We should have stayed and solved the nation's problems, and he laid out the 3 lead issues that he wanted to push for this upcoming legislative year. That was increase minimum wage, extend unemployment benefits, and pass comprehensive immigration reform. It's not a coincidence that all 3 of those unify Democrats and divide Republicans. Well, that was the clarion call for Democrats to get behind that. John Boehner should have seen that, because every Republican should know that that was just essentially a naked ploy to divide Republicans. So the only way to rationalize that fits within the last paragraph of an op-ed I wrote last week. It was in the Washington Times. But it's this, that there's Mark Zuckerberg money, there is Bill Gates money, there's Google money, there's George Soros money there, and the U.S. Chamber's been very involved. I think if you track that all down, you'll get a lot better idea on why this could be pushed at us, rather than trying to find a logical foundation for it, because I will say that logical foundation just doesn't exist.
Okay, no secret that there has been some tension between you and the Speaker. He reportedly referred to you by word we cannot use on the air, unless we want to lose our FCC license. How is that relationship now? Is it going to be patched up? Can you guys work together on other issues?
Well, the Speaker's had a number of opportunities to clear that up, and he's declined at every opportunity. So that's essentially a public confession that what he said on the House floor to a couple of liberal Democrats was true. That's not been denied, so it is true. And it isn't up to me to go and demand an apology. Instead, I'm going to go forward doing my job, keeping my oath of office, and maintaining the decorum necessary to be effective in this job. I think it's interesting, though, that I and others have been lectured about having verbal discipline when we see that that doesn't exist within our own Speaker.
Clearly, he's been upset with some of the things that you've said, some of the comments you've made with regard to immigration that he feels are inflammatory and don't help the conversation. Anything that you want to say on those points?
Yes, I would say that everything I've said has been factually and demonstrably true. And the only thing that really offended the Speaker was that it didn't support his agenda, it opposed his agenda. And so that's the behavior. When you can't win the argument, you start calling names. And if you don't have the data, if you don't have the intellectual foundation, if you don't have the philosophical foundation, then you call names and try to marginalize. But what happened at Cambridge instead last week was a lot of the positions that I have taken for the last 2 or 2.5 years now enjoy broad support among our conference, and they stepped up and said so. That can't be denied, Shannon.
That is absolutely appears to be playing out, and our door is always open to the Speaker if he wants to come discuss these issues as well. Congressman, thank you very much for coming on. Good to see you.
Thanks for having me here. I appreciate it.
All right, we want you to weigh in on